Since Jesus fulfilled the law and we are now under grace, what parts of the law should Christians follow? That's a good question. The Jewish law, mainly we're talking the Old Testament scriptures, were broken into three categories: dietary, ceremonial, and moral. But strictly speaking, when you look at verses in the Old Testament, under the law, some of the law had to do with dietary aspects, what you could eat or what you shouldn't eat. Some had to do with ceremonial aspects, the feasts, the festivals. And some were strictly moral in the sense of practices, what you should or shouldn't do. So the answer is, what we know now, because things that Jesus said or the New Testament tells us, the dietary and the ceremonial aspects of the law have been fulfilled in Christ. The moral aspect has been fulfilled in Christ too, but is still intact for us to obey. Now here's why I say this. Listen to this about the dietary aspect. This is Mark 7:18-19. Jesus said, "Don't you see that nothing that enters a man from the outside can make him unclean? For it does not go into his heart, but into his stomach and then out of his body." And then the rest of the verse says, in saying this, Jesus declared all foods clean. So Jesus actually took the dietary aspect of the law and he said, look, that does not make a person clean or unclean, because what you eat just passes through your body. It's what goes into your heart that you should be concerned about. So by saying this, Matthew writes there in parentheses, in saying this, Jesus declared all foods clean. Now, that doesn't mean that all foods are good for you. You can make that personal decision on your own. But it means that there are no longer dietary restrictions. So ceremonial aspect, this is Galatians 2:16-17. Therefore, do not let anyone judge you by what you eat or drink, or with regard to a religious festival, a new moon celebration, or a Sabbath day. These are a shadow of the things that were to come. The reality, however, is found in Christ. So no more festival or ceremonial requirements. Look, you can see Christ in the Jewish feasts. I'm not saying that people who want to practice, like example, Passover. I know a lot of Christians that like to have Seder dinners. That's fine, because you can see Christ revealed in the Passover meal as our Passover lamb. I'm not saying if you do those things, you shouldn't. I'm just saying those are no longer requirements, are no longer binding by the law. Those things were pointing to Christ. The dietary aspect was teaching people about cleanliness, pointing to the holiness of God. The ceremonial aspects were foreshadowing Christ, to understand Him through the feasts. So it's beautiful how Christ is displayed throughout the feast. The moral aspect of the law is still intact, okay? So in other words, it's okay to eat shrimp, but not okay to commit adultery, all right? The dietary aspect, you're free, but the moral code is still intact. Don't steal, don't lie, don't commit adultery. Those are the moral code, and that part is still intact.